Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Could you kind of wave at me if you can hear me okay? Let me know you can hear me. Okay, good, because I'm depending on you to help me. The technician who should have been here uh, is a no-show today for some reason.
You're
So
perfect.
anyway, my name is Florence Gillman, and I'm a former professor of biblical studies at the University of San Diego, where I taught for 35 years. And I currently teach at the Franciscan School of Theology occasionally. And I'm a Timken docent since 2022. So today's docent talk is, as you will see on the screen, entitled Iconic Thoughts. And this is my personal thoughts about the Timken icon collection. And I've taken it in various directions of research that I find interesting. So I'll try to share with you some of these things that have struck me as quite interesting. The icon here on the first page, the first photo, is one of the oldest known icons that has survived. So early 500s, and it is now in St. Catherine's in the Sinai, which is a phenomenal place in terms of both art history, biblical history, even political history. So I'll be telling you about that place at a certain point. If you want to ask me any questions, I would appreciate you put them in the chat. And also, I will stop occasionally and ask you if you have any questions. Otherwise, please keep yourself muted. Um, yeah, so use the chat and then I'll stop occasionally. Okay. So for those of you who are not local, this is a frontal view of the Timken Museum of Art. It is a collection that at any one point is exhibiting between 70, 80, 85 artworks. It's a very classical collection. It consists of mostly European art, some American art, and then a whole collection of icons. And these icons are Russian icons. When we talk about icons, there's two main groups, Russian and Greek. So the Timken collection was especially rooted in one of the Timken, one of the sisters who collected the icon, one of their special interests. So first of all, let's talk about what is an icon. Because an icon looks like a painting, but it isn't exactly a painting. There's a lot more aspects of it that let it become what is known as an icon. The word icon is actually taken right from the Greek, meaning an image. And for those for whom icons are religious pictures, for those believers, normally Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Ethiopian Orthodox, all the Orthodox churches of the eastern part of the ancient world think of icons as windows. And right there, we step into the Eastern world in a different way than we who live in the Western world deal with art. So all the way along, I'll be trying to say things about Western art because I think this is interesting that we in the West use art, particularly religious art related to religion or religious subjects. We use art very differently from how icons are used. So icons are held by the believers as a window. Sometimes they're actually called windows They're a window into another place. So this is very much, as I say, an Eastern idea. And I'll be giving you some background about Eastern Christianity as a kind of review in case you haven't thought about it recently. I use this as the title page painting. It's the largest icon, or I think it's one of the largest in the Timken collection, maybe not the largest. Anyway, this is known as the Georgian Mother of God. And notice the information about it is the century in which it's painted is listed, but also instead of a name of an artist, it says Moscow School. And right there we see something important, that most icons, with the exception of a few, and I'll talk about one of those later, most icons are painted by multiple painters. And those painters are working together. Therefore, they are credited as a school. So in the Timken collection, we have especially the Moscow School and the Novgorod School. When I show this large painting to little school children and they look at it and I say, is there anything unusual? And they will say, well, what are all those dots? What are all those dots for? And that's a very good point of observation, because this gorgeous icon, like so many others, would have been covered with a metal covering called a rika that would have covered all but the face of Mary and Jesus and maybe the hand of Mary. So that metal has been removed, probably to be sold. And that's why many icons have many, many puncture marks, which were literally from nails. Okay, to move into this subject, we need to do some geography and some history. So this is a map, a teaching map from of the late Roman Empire. So we're seeing the lands around the Mediterranean here in the center. There's the Mediterranean. In a way, it's kind of nice that it doesn't have any words on it, because you can see it more as a landmass and see see the important division here. So the Roman Empire was huge and difficult to govern. And after a while, Roman emperors decided maybe there should be two emperors, what they called two Augusti and two Caesars. So that would be sort of our equivalent to president and vice president, kind of. So they appointed two in the West and two in the East. And anytime you have rule by effectively committee, divisions, of course, work in. And so the empire literally crumbled from internal problems. There were many external problems too, but in any case, by 395 AD, so late 4th century, this is what you see. And it had been in this condition pretty much since the falling apart in the late 200s. So we see on the left, Western Roman Empire, and on the right, the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, the thing is, this basically follows language division. So the left side, the red part of the empire, was basically Latin speaking. It hadn't been earlier. Yeah, Latin was the language of the Romans, but they only spoke it at home for the most part. They really were enamored with the Greek civilization, and they spoke Greek in most of their empire. But by the 200s, Latin was beginning to be ascendant, and Latin was more and more accepted as a language of literature and diplomacy and so on. So the Latin West became less and less conversant with the Greek East. So Greek remained the lingua franca of the East. And so this is really right here where my arrow is right now, and right down to here. This is really a language division that is also then a political division. So what we're especially interested in with icons is this region right here, of course, which is Greece. And of course, the nearer parts of Turkey. And I will also be talking about Egypt down here. So this is the Greek East. Now, you'll notice that north of what was the empire, okay, we have what is today Bulgaria right here, and Moldova right up here is Ukraine, and this borders then on Russia. There's Russia over here. That's important because when we're looking at Russian Orthodox icons, we need to keep in mind that the Russians did not become Christians until a long time after the Greeks. And therefore, there was a whole tradition already of icons among the Greeks and the Greek-speaking regions that the Russians had to learn and, of course, then make their own. I'll come back to that. Here. All right, let me show you for those of you that aren't local or are not docents or haven't been able to visit the Timken, let me show you the collection of icons. So there's a whole gallery devoted to the icons. And so in this photo, I'm standing in the center of the gallery and looking at what is called the royal doors here. Now, this gallery is laid out basically like an Orthodox church. So this area with this door here would be called the, quote, front of the church. And you see these beautiful doors that we'll look closely at. And you see this row of paintings here called the desis. On the right is this Georgian Mother of God that I just showed you. And I would like you to also notice that a lot of these icons are relatively small. And again, when we talk about the collector, Amy, probably she was mainly collecting for icons she could hang in her very lovely home. So this is one view of about half the icon collection that is displayed. Now this is looking the other way. So this would be what you would call the back of the church. And this is also arranged in a rather traditional sense. So notice again, these icons are small, except for this one right here. I like to think about this icon. There are many icons like this. This is called the Last Judgment. And it's a long story of church history, you could say, and of and it kind of goes like this. It kind of goes in looping back and forth. And yeah, some people get off right here and go to hell right there. Okay, they aren't too successful, and other people, of course, make it through the judgment and so on. Traditionally, a judgment icon, last judgment icon, was held above the exit door of the church, what you would call in a church today the back door, which makes me laugh because the last thing you would see going out of church is a reminder. Don't forget, there's a last judgment. Okay, now over here, you can sort of see these small icons still have the Rika on them, the metal cover. And the metal is, I'm not positive what type of metal it is. It's in pretty tough shape actually right now. All right, so that's what the gallery looks like. Now let's talk about the collector, Amy Putnam, because she's a very interesting person. So somehow, I don't think the specialists who looked at all the paperwork about Amy, I don't think anybody knows how it happened, but she got very interested in Russian, especially Russian language. And so you can see that at the age of what would she be, in her early 50s, she went to Stanford to study Russian. I believe she was there a summer, maybe a semester also. And that was a wonderful thing for a woman of the time. It was only in the early 20s that here and there women were being allowed into universities anyway. So for her to go to study Russian was a great initiative on her part. Nobody also seems to know what kind of clicked and made her want to collect icons. She mainly collected small ones, which suggests that she collected them to hang on walls in her home. But as she neared the end of her life, in 1958, she started buying a couple big ones, probably thinking that these would be part of a collection that she would set up in a museum. So now she had two sisters, and I think I have a picture here. Yes. Okay. So that's Amy on the left in her older years, and that's Anne on the right, her sister Anne. They had another sister who died younger. So these two became the art collectors. Now they collected a lot of other art, quite a bit of art even before the Russian icons. And those they gave to the San Diego Museum of Art. But in their later years, as Amy must have been thinking what she wanted to do with the Russian icons, she wanted a different place. Whether she didn't really see eye to eye with the current curator of the Museum of Art is not clear. And if she didn't see eye to eye with him, that's absolutely a mystery, because they had endowed that museum with many, many wonderful pieces of art. In any case, their lawyer was aware that she wanted to place this collection in a museum of its own. Now, as far as I can see, the lawyer was the go-between between Amy and the Timken family of Cleveland. So the Timkens were industrialists working on ball bearings, I believe. They had connections to San Diego. They summered in San Diego. And the lawyer of Amy and Anne was also the lawyer of the Timkens. And it looks to me that he was he knew Amy was looking for a place. And he also knew the Timkens were very, what do I want to say? They really loved San Diego, and that they would like to do something very positive for San Diego. So anyway, the Timkens endowed the museum, and that's where the collection went. That's how we have it. And that's the nucleus of our collection. So, like everything else in the art museum, one always has to remember that paintings were not made for museums. Okay, paintings were made for situations, and that's part of understanding them. They weren't made to be displayed on museum walls. So it's important to think about what, in this case, what an Orthodox church would be like and where these icons would have been located. So this is a teaching outline of any Orthodox church. So kind of the main features of it. And so, as I've already said, you see here the royal doors. So on this particular diagram, it's not particularly painted, but always then it's flanked by certain saints, by Jesus and certain saints. Up here this painting is called the Desis. Yeah, and the way the Orthodox religious ceremony equivalent to the Western Roman Catholic Mass. Okay, the way it works is these doors are open at a certain point after the preaching in the service, and the clergy go through here back to the main altar where they have the words of consecration. Then they come back out and give the people what in the Western Church we call communion. So here you can also see some of the various terms for the parts of an Orthodox church. So let me show you again then our royal doors. So you can see how this wall then has become the dividing point in an imaginary church, and these doors would be open, and through them then the priests and the deacons would go for the Eucharistic part of the celebration. So this painting right up here and this row is the Desis. And I think, yeah, okay. So the royal gates that we have that are Russian. Everything we have is Russian. So this is Novgorod, 14th century. I put the dimensions in just to give people a feel for this. So basically a little more than 5 feet high. They're on the east wall of the church, what we call the front of the church. But why is the front of the church always east? That's a Christian tradition because Jesus rose from the dead, and a symbol of that is the rising sun. And therefore, churches are always placed so that the main altar is toward the east. I think there are some exceptions. I'm not sure every denomination observes that anymore, but you definitely see that with the older, bigger denominations such as Catholicism, Episcopalianism, Lutheranism, so on. Okay, let's go now to the Desis. So this is 1400s, 15th century, and this is Novgorod, very, very famous area for the painting of icons. And as I said earlier, this and all the icons could theoretically have been done by many different painters. Maybe some painters specialized, for example, in certain colors. This one is partly damaged. You can see all of this right here has flaked off. Icons are done on wood, and paint, like it does on other forms of wood, will flake off. Okay, back to the other part of the gallery. And this is a close-up then of the Last Judgment, which is traditionally on the west wall then of an Orthodox church. Here you get a closer view of this kind of a painting was a phenomenal teaching tool because it tells the story of so many aspects of Christianity, so many different people, and important figures throughout the history of Christianity, as well as theological ideas. So now this, like all icons, is a copy of copies that were copies of copies that were copies of copies of copies. So it's a tradition. If you're going to paint the Last Judgment, or if you're going to paint the previous figure of the Desis, you're going to paint Jesus enthroned, You can't decide to change the position of the person. You can't decide to play around with colors. You can't change what has happened before. It's a tradition. And people are able to tell what you painted because they know the tradition. So that's why you can't change it. Um, you can arrange it a little bit differently. You can add a few things to this story. You could leave out a few parts maybe, but overall it has to be the same. Um, just as an example, here's an Orthodox church in San Anselmo. And here you see, this is a very modern, beautiful Orthodox church. Here you see the royal doors, and here you see the decis, and so on. Okay, so here's another view of the same church. The lighting is just different, but very beautiful, a modern, beautiful, beautiful, bright colors. Okay, so let's do some history and let's talk about many other aspects of icons. Okay, I already said icons are different from pictures in Western art. So Christianity, Judaism, especially, have plenty of art about religious subjects, about biblical stories, about in Christianity, vast amount of art about Christian history. But these aren't icons, okay? Icons do teach, uh, they do teach stories about the Bible and so on, but they function differently. The main thing isn't the story. The main thing is the relationship between the viewer and the icon. So therefore, they've been called windows into heaven. Now, if you've noticed in Orthodox churches, very often there'll be a kneeler in front of an icon, maybe a vigil candle lit, and a person will kneel before the icon. Some believers kiss icons. And so they're relating to this picture very differently from, let's say, how a Roman Catholic or an Episcopalian or a Lutheran relates to the art in their church. Why? Because the icon invites the believer to enter the scene. And that's different from Western art. Western art wants to teach about the past and about what happened. It wants to inspire the people, but it doesn't ask you to be there. Whereas an icon says, come into this scene. So in many ways, it's a form of meditation in which the believer, the viewer, has an encounter with the with whoever's in the icon picture. Now, the term we use for that, the subject of the icon is a prototype. Okay, so the person, the saint or Jesus or Mary and so on is the prototype of the icon, and that's to whom one is related. Okay, I'm going to stop right now and read the chat questions. And let's see. Okay, thanks for the comments. I see that. As someone pointed out, early maps would have east on top. Yeah, we have some really interesting maps with where we have to shift the direction and so on. Okay, if you would like to ask any questions, could you raise your hands? I think I can see a lot of you. No? Okay, I'll keep going. Okay, so if you think of any more questions, please put them in the chat. Okay, one question in the chat from Ryan says, do the icons represent 50% of the artworks on display at the Timken, or what percent? I don't really think of it that way. They are one of one, two, three, four, five galleries. They are one gallery of five. Plus, we also have a gallery of contemporary art that is turning over at different times. So I don't know exactly in terms of artwork how many, what percent. It might be in some of the Timken catalogs or something like that. By the way, the Timken website is phenomenal. You can see really good high definition pictures of these artworks. Okay, let's go on here. And now let's do some comparison of Greek and Russian icons. So I already showed you the map, and I already pointed out that the Greeks Greeks become Christian far earlier than the Russians. So the Greek tradition of icons is older, 9 centuries older. So the Russians were not converted until around 988 when the Kievan Rus, so the Russians in what is today Kiev, become Christian, and then it spreads to the east, Moscow, and so on from there. So the Greek art of icons has had 9 centuries to develop. Now, we don't really have many icons before the 400s. Well, we have catacomb art that I'll be showing you and so on. There is Christian art before we actually have icons. So, okay, while the Russians don't become Christian until some 900 years after the Greeks, they learn a lot from the Greeks. They're influenced by the Greek traditions. Some are literally taught by Greek iconographers. When the Russians themselves then adopt the iconic form of art, wherever they put letters on, usually abbreviations for Mary or Jesus or the saint or whatever is being represented, they use Slavonic. And the Greek then remain using Greek. So looking at this again, okay, so we're talking about the Greeks have a tradition, some of art, and there is other Christian art in this eastern part of the Mediterranean world and in the West. Okay, so some 900 years even before the Kievans right here and the Russians here become Christian. How do these icons differ from each other? Well, it's really quite subtle in some ways, I think. Greek icons portray people who look relatively normal, but Russian icons portray people who are very narrow with very long leg bones and arm bones and hands and fingers, very long, very large eyes. And probably one reason, especially was regarding the eyes, the large eyes are meant to meet your eyes too, meant to help draw you in to the situation of the painting. So the Greek style seems more natural. And the Russian style also shows figures who bow very humbly, very, very, very servant-like positions before Christ. The Greek icons tend to be brighter, where the Russians tend to be darker. When you look at old icons, so now they've been varnished so many times that the old ones are all pretty dark. The faces tend to be dark and so on. So much varnish has been put on over the painting. As you know, icons are all painted on wood also, so they tend to be warped. They tend to have wormholes. They tend to crack along the lines of the wood. That will be important to remember when I come to another icon I want to tell you about. Okay, so the prototype is the person being depicted and the main character of the icon. And the believer is to enter into an encounter with that prototype, okay, worships the prototype, not the material of the icon, not the wooden material itself. Okay, so the icon is considered holy, but it's because of the experience. So the wood itself is just wood. So it's a lot like if we have a picture of someone who's very important to us, and we look at that picture and it kind of takes your mind back to not just remembering them, but almost talking with them. Yet an icon wants to draw you into a deeper sense than that. It wants you to move into that place where that prototype is. You could say it's a form of meditation. Yeah. Okay. So icons are not, you don't say someone painted this icon. I mean, we do roughly say that, but we shouldn't. The term is they're written because the idea is that they convey teaching. And the icon writer has to get ready to paint the icon. I know an icon painter, a Melkite priest, and he and his wife work together when he's ready to paint an icon. And they both fast and pray for a few days ahead of the actual making of the icon. They have everything ready. They have the wood piece. They have the gold leaf, which is put on first, I believe. Yeah, so they're really ready and they're spiritually ready for this. And it's kind of interesting. There's among the ideas regarding an icon painter is that it's usually he, although more, and currently there are female icon painters too, fortunately. Anyway, you must try to seek pardon from your enemies. You must be at peace. Otherwise, the state of your soul will affect the painting. That's pretty interesting. And yeah, as I already said, more than one person can, of course, work on the icons. These people work with very strict rules. So you don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to paint Mary and Jesus, and I want Mary to have blonde hair and orange, be wearing orange, you know, something different. No, you can't do that. You can't do that in iconic art. You must follow the prototype. So they're very strict rules. And yeah, you can't soften or change facial looks because that too is a part of the prototype. And besides that, the person has to look, especially in Russian Orthodox icons, the person has to look less human. They are, because they aren't part of us anymore. They're in another place. They're beyond this world. Okay, all Christian art began, of course, early. Some of the earliest Christian art is catacomb art of what we have, what has survived. So in the catacombs, we tend to find frescoes on the walls of some catacombs over some tombs. But it was dangerous to be a believer. And so the art was kept to a minimum, you could say. Probably much of it was destroyed, much of the small amount that was even created. But art is very important in teaching, teaching new generations. So of course Christians developed art very early, but it's very hard to find it. So we call this early period pre-Constantinian. That means before the period when Constantine was the emperor and he himself became Christian, and all of a sudden the persecutions were over. The persecutions really let up with Constantine. That's a huge turning point in Christianity. It's not totally positive. Yeah, it's great that the persecution stopped, but now it became socially not only acceptable, but for higher classes around Constantine, almost de rigueur to be a Christian. And that had all kinds of repercussions because people became Christians. Some people became Christians for the wrong reasons. And that really changed things a lot. One of the things that it did allow is the building of enormous churches in the period of Constantine and later, and therefore massive amounts of decorations. And some of those have survived very well, especially mosaics, which, of which there are many. Someone's asking me a question to commenting about Constantine's edict. Yes, that's nice. And someone's asking me if the availability of icons has to do with the Russian Revolution. Yes, when Amy was purchasing the icons in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, this was after the Russian Revolution, after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, and a lot of icons were on the market. And emigres from what became the Soviet Union often brought icons with them in their luggage, literally. And so some of those went on the antiquities market. But also the Soviet government was pretty smart and they figured out, oh, we can sell icons to the West and make money. And so there's an article by a famous historian of icons, Wendy Solomon, and she points out that the Soviet government even put icons on the antiquities market and especially wanted them to be advertised to Germans and Americans who were most likely to buy them. And that the Soviet government made sure these were not the best icons of the country. So even though they were atheistic and promoting atheism, they managed to keep some of the most phenomenal ones. And actually, I'm coming to that. So thank you for that question. I better stop again and see if there's any other questions. Okay, so we're back with Constantine. With Constantine, we have the massive building of massive churches, and therefore the need for decoration. And this leads to a great flourishing of Christian art. Okay. Let me see if I have another. Yeah. So this is the period then when, so from the 400s especially forward is when we start to really see icons. Now, I don't think we have any icon from the 400s, but we have this one from the early 500s, first half of the 6th century. So I think this is a phenomenal icon. It is in Egypt at St. Catherine's that I'll tell you about in a minute. And it has amazingly survived. And so this is the type of the very earliest icons, at least as far as we know about them. Now you notice that in this picture, Jesus is holding a book, presumably the Bible, and you notice that it's in book form. So books took over from scrolls beginning in the period of early Christianity, and Christians really promoted this form of book. Technically, we call it a codex. So Christians promoted producing codices, the plural of codex, and our oldest complete Bibles are in this format, almost complete Bibles. Our oldest pieces of the Bible are fragments of papyrus, pages of papyrus. But that's another whole story. Yeah. Okay, back to Constantine and his impact and so on. So back to my teaching map. Just keep this in mind now as we go forward and recall, there's a little more detail on this map of the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. And notice the Eastern Empire, okay, extending down into Egypt, very important as we go forward here. But also in the Eastern Empire, so in the Greek area, okay, a couple centuries after Constantine, there was a phenomenon known as iconoclasm within Orthodoxy. And we're in the 8th century and into the 9th with this issue, which explains a lot about why we don't have a lot of early icons like I just showed you. Okay, that 5th century icon of Jesus that is in Egypt is really, really rare. And part of the reason is this whole issue in Christianity that still exists in some ways among the various denominations, and that's known as iconoclasm. So iconoclasm means the destruction of icons. Okay, it means anti-icon. And historically, there was an emperor of Constantinople, emperor of the Eastern Empire, named Leo III, and he held over against the Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople, Germanus. Leo III held that icons were equivalent to the graven images prohibited by the Ten Commandments. He held that icons were instruments of idolatry, and that people actually worshipped the physical icon, and that had been forbidden by the Ten Commandments. So he ordered the destruction of icons, wholesale destruction of icons. And that is why that 5th century icon of Jesus and the one of Peter also, those are really rare. Now, what's really interesting is that Islam was already a major force. Okay, Islam was moving around the Mediterranean in the 600s and the 700s. And wherever Islam was in control, they didn't care. They did not carry through the decree of iconoclasm from Leo III. And that's why those particular icons survived in Egypt, because the Muslims were in control, which is very interesting to think about. And someone just pointed out on the chat that there was a similar reaction in the Protestant Reformation. Yes, indeed. So iconoclasm is not new. So later during the Protestant Reformation, especially the Calvinists were anti-icons, anti-statues, even anti-typical Western art in churches. Lutherans were slightly closer to the Catholic position, and the Catholic position continued to allow paintings, statues, but the Great Council of Trent on the Catholic side had a whole session about art and a whole document about what art could or could not consist of, and so on. Okay, so going on here. So, for example, on the Catholic side, during this period of iconoclasm where, there was questions about it and so on, places like Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, which is filled with 4th century mosaics, phenomenal stuff. I plan to give a talk just about Santa Maria Maggiore in the future. Yeah, fortunately that survived. And yeah, as I say, some painting, iconic type painting, this seems to be in the catacombs. So anyway, the early period of icon destruction lasted until 780. So from the 740s to 780. And then there was another wave of it in the 800s. But there was this interesting parade of 1,000 monks in Constantinople in 842 carrying icons and protesting, defending icons. And that's the roots of a celebration in Orthodox churches the first Sunday of Great Lent. It's the triumph of Orthodoxy. So the insistence that icons should continue to be made and venerated. But yeah, as we just said, and as one of you brought up, yeah, there were iconoclastic concerns in the Reformation, and there's still some iconoclastic concerns in various areas of Christianity today. I have seen myself among Roman Catholics, what I would call some kind of sense that certain statues, for example, have power in themselves. They don't have power in themselves. They're plaster of Paris. They're meant to remind a person of the saint's story, but I have seen what I would consider deviations from the real use of Christian art. This is a Psalter, so a book of Psalms from the 800s. And here you see a demonstration or illustration of an iconoclast destroying an icon of Christ. So people went around just with terrible amount of destruction. I see someone else writing here. Someone who maybe we could come back to this one about the Muslim reaction to a lot of this also. Okay. Now there is a tradition in Christianity, or there was a tradition. I don't know of anyone who promotes it or has for 1,000 years anyway, probably. In the Eastern Church, there's the idea that St. Luke was the original iconographer. By that, they meant that he wrote the prototype of Mary and Jesus. What does that mean? That means that he painted the first painting of Mary and Jesus, and that becomes the prototype. And once a prototype exists, if you want to paint Mary and Jesus, that is one of the forms you must use. It was also held that it was kept in Constantinople, and it's long lost in history. Nobody knows exactly whether it really existed, whatever happened to it if it did. And sometimes Luke is pictured this way, so here you see in the 14th century a painting of Luke painting this image that I showed you in that early icon of the Georgian Mother of God. So the story also says that in the 8th century, there were writings that referred to Luke, and icons of Mary and Jesus. And maybe this was kind of a deduction because Luke's gospel says a lot about the childhood of Jesus. Luke's infancy narrative is very long, but actually, historically, from the perspective of biblical scholarship, it's most likely that Luke was much younger than Jesus, maybe did not even know Jesus historically. Luke's gospel, we date it to 90, 85 to 90 maybe, and given the lifespan of most people in that period, in that area of the world, it's actually hardly likely that Luke knew Jesus and Mary personally. But that's one more, thing to add into the considerations about this story that Luke painted, this tradition that made Luke the original iconographer of Mary and Jesus. Anyway, this type of an icon is called a hodegatria icon. That means, hodegatria means shows the way. So notice Mary's hand. Her hand is pointing to Jesus. And whenever an icon is doing this, whenever Mary is doing this, pointing to Jesus, that's taken as a gesture of Jesus is the way. She's showing the viewer the way. And thus the Greek hoda in Greek, hodos in Greek is the way. So she's showing the way. Another important concept in the icons, very important concept, is that Mary is the mother of God, not the mother of Christ. So this was a very early debate that resulted in those who said she was Christokos, not Theotokos, being considered heretics by the vast majority of the Christian groups that held her to be the mother of God, the us. This idea still divides some Christians from others. So icons portray her as the Theotokos. In the West, this kind of icon is also called not hodegatria in Greek, but Our Lady of the Way. There was a monastery in Constantinople built especially for this icon. My research shows that there's very little archaeology to be done there. There's just some ruins of the foundation of that monastery. But the story also said that it was Eudokia, the wife of Theodosius II, who had brought the hodegatria to the Holy Land where Luke had painted it. Okay, yeah, this icon is gone. Some thought it was taken to Russia or Italy. The Russians who claimed they had it say that it was destroyed by the German occupation of Smolensk in 1941. Copies were made, of course, and these are some of the most venerated Russian icons. So this is a view from 1912. I assume it has been colored by a later photographer, where of the shrine of the hodegatria in Smolensk. If you have to look really closely, so try to not see the gold for a minute. And there you see Mary's face. There you see the face of Jesus. And there you see her hand pointing to him. So this is very black, but now destroyed. Okay, let's see. I think I talked about all these things. So back to the oldest ones. The very oldest that we have are at St. Catherine's in the Sinai, because the Muslims were in control and did not care about carrying out iconoclastic reforms. So this is very lucky. We also have this early St. Peter from the 500s. And I'll show you this monastery quickly. So if you've listened to some of my lectures before, I often talk about this monastery, and you think that it was the only monastery in the world. But the point is, it is so old and so remote that so much survived there. And it's just an incredible place. Perhaps some of you have been there. I myself would like to go. Right now, there's a branch of Al Qaeda that's very active in the Sinai, which is very, very dangerous at times. Anyway, this monastery was founded probably in the 400s, and here's where we get one of the oldest, almost complete copies of the whole Bible in Greek, and so on. So their collection of icons is beyond extraordinary, and their isolation also contributed to why the icons survived. This is one of the monks, Justin, whom I have met at conferences. He's actually an American, actually a tall Texan who became a Greek Orthodox monk here. And with his skills, computer skills and so on, he has helped digitize the vast amount of material, documenting with photography and so on. And the manuscripts are being preserved in digitization. There's another 5th century icon from St. Catherine's. This one's really famous. St. John Climacus, in other words, climbing the heavenly ladder, and some of the devils pulling off some monks into temptation. So this is one of the very famous. Okay, I'm going to close with the last thing is current issues with icons. One of the most interesting and current ones involves a Russian icon, maybe the most famous icon in the world, and that's Andrei Rublev's Trinity. So this is the big gallery, Tretyakov in Moscow, where the Soviets put a lot of really good icons. And this is the Rublev room right here. And here's the icon that I want to talk about right over here. So it's the Trinity icon. It is the 3 figures who visit Abraham in Genesis, who become symbols then of the Trinity and Christianity. And this icon was there since 1929. And it is now in very, very, very weak shape. It is easily fragmented into 3 parts and flaking and so on. And the conservators at the museum do not want it moved, and they want to keep it right there in temperature and humidity control and so on. But yeah, just recently Putin ordered this icon to be returned to the Russian Orthodox Church, and therefore endangered it in the transference and so on. It's a political move, according to the judgment of many commentators. It's a move in view of the war, with the belief by some Russian believers that this icon does work wonders and it will bring them victory on the battlefield. But it's also seen as a reward to the Patriarch of Moscow, who has defended the war, to the point that he and the Pope in Rome, for example, have a major disagreement about his support of the war. It has been moved to the newer Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. Here's where you see it on display now, and you see people lined up to see it. I was kind of interested that I don't see a kneeler in front of it and the typical candles or vigil light. But anyway, this is where it's on display. Yeah, there's the belief now that the Soviet Union is over and Russia has returned to favoring the Russian Orthodox Church, and the Russian Orthodox Church has returned to favoring the government of Putin. That's the current situation. You may know about this cathedral. This is how it looked in 1931, and the Soviets ordered it to be bombed, to be destroyed, and all its contents, and some were saved. But for the most part, the atheistic Soviet government of the time said we would prefer to build on this spot, the palace of the Soviets. So they did bomb it, 1931, and they dug it all out, and which was already a massive project, and they built the foundation for the Palace of Soviets, but never completed the actual building. So what they did was they completed it instead as a pool. So this was always a great ironic story that the cathedral had become a swimming pool. And now in this current Russian period where atheism is no longer the prevailing spirit, they reconstructed this beginning in 1995. And so in that previous picture, what you see here is the new cathedral. So here's the pool. This was what was the foundation. Unbelievable. Yeah, so they finished it as a pool. I could go on and on, but I think we're running out of time. I'm going to the chat. Someone asked which museums or churches have the largest collections today. Offhand, I would not know that. Certainly, there is a museum of icons in the United States, I believe. But also you need to subdivide it. Who has the Russian icons? Who has the Greek icons? There are Greek Orthodox churches that have phenomenal icon decorations. There's one particularly in Chicago. So other than that, I don't know a lot of statistics. Yes. Okay, so thank you all. I'd be happy to take questions, and please jump in here if you want to ask questions. No questions? Okay.
I would like to ask a question.
Sure.
When the icons were done by the schools, was there one person who painted the picture, or was there a supervisor in charge of how the figure was actually drawn before it was painted in?
Okay, that's a great question. I believe as far as specialists in icons know, which I'm not a specialist, but as far as I have read and learned, there were many people involved. And in a school of painters, some people would be the initial setting it up, doing the gold work, possibly doing the sketch. And other people would be, specializing in certain colors or certain aspects of it. So it really was collaborative. And that's an interesting spirit because, it's not like in the West where an artist can take credit for his or her work. But the religious art of iconography, it isn't interested in human credit at all, at all. Except Andrei Rublev, we know he did his own work. So yeah, his name is attached to that icon, and there's a few others like him.
And
Thanks.
I also wanted to comment about your saying that the churches face to the east. Synagogues face toward Jerusalem. So on this continent, they face toward the east.
Oh, interesting. Yes. And I think mosques also face toward Mecca, I believe. So that's different, isn't it? But in Christianity, it became the rising sun became the symbol of the resurrection. So it was east. But I think there's exceptions because sometimes, the lay of the land determines how the church is going to be set up too. Yeah, interesting thinking, huh? Other questions, comments? Okay, thank you all for tuning in, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Where are you?
I'm in San Francisco,
Oh,
so
okay.
close to you,
Have
but
you
I
been to the
haven't
Timken?
been. No, I haven't been to San Diego. But I love that you make it possible for me to be at the Timken.
Yes, it's interesting. It's interesting to me too. We have people tuning in from all over. And then these are archived on the YouTube page, I think it is. So yeah, you can always find some
Yeah,
there
all
too.
of the lectures are online. You can find them on the Facebook page.
I love having Florence right here talking to us. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.